I can't beat the ball today. Gonna be a lot of that.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. First and foremost, before we get started, make sure, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit the post notification bell so you'll know whenever I upload any new content, I go live, all that good stuff. And as you can tell from the beginning of the video, Atlanta Falcons are back in training camp. It is that time of year again, and football season is quickly approaching. And the Atlanta Falcons have now been in training camp for the past couple days. They just wrapped up day 5 of training camp today. And I feel like after the first few days, we can kind of navigate in a way through a lot of or at least some of what we have heard to this point about what the Atlanta Falcons are looking like so far in training camp. Now, I want to just say this because I do think it is noteworthy, even though we are talking about it. Some of the stuff that we are talking about is clearly not going to even be relevant by the time the season actually rolls around. Those first few days of training camp are pretty much getting back into it, just getting back into the groove of football, knocking some rust off. I mean, we haven't even put pads on yet. I would probably expect that to be later on this week when we see the pads come on, and that is where the intensity is obviously going to ramp up a little bit, and we can probably get a little bit of a better idea of where this team maybe is. But right now, you know, some of the stuff, obviously you take everything that you hear with a grain of salt. But we have, I think, had enough come out to where, you know, that there are some things to talk about. And the first thing that obviously I think comes to mind, especially with what we heard on the first few days of training camp, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you know, today, Sunday, is Kyle Pitts. Everyone is once again impressed with Kyle Pitts. And let me go ahead and say that this is not the first time that we have heard the Falcons are impressed with Kyle Pitts and how he looks in the early stages of training camp. It feels like, honestly, every year that Kyle Pitts has been here, and this is his 5th year here, that he has basically been the god of training camp in a sense, that he looks so amazing, and there's going to be such an emphasis to get the ball to Kyle Pitts. As Michael Penix said in his press conference a couple days ago, that we're going to see a lot of getting the ball to KP this year. That's really not the first time that we have heard something like that alluded to by a Falcons quarterback. Kirk Cousins kind of alluded to it last year in a sense that Kyle Pitts was one of his favorite targets. We have even heard, you know, when Matt Ryan was here, that, you know, Kyle Pitts was looking really good. And obviously, as we see outside of that 1 year with Matt Ryan when he was a rookie, Kyle Pitts has really, for the most part, been underwhelming here. But with that being said, I do think something differs in what Michael Penix Jr. said at the podium and how explicitly he said that we're going to get the ball to Kyle Pitts this year. So I do think now that raises the question, is this finally going to be the year for Kyle Pitts to explode in this Falcons offense that is filled, obviously, with a gunslinger in Michael Penix that is going to take those deep shots outfield. And we did especially see in situations such as in Washington last year, some chemistry grow. But there are also still many aspects that I think we can have questions about. Is this the year for Kyle Pitts? Because we've heard it every year. And you can only hear something so many times and it not come true before you almost just ignore it. And it feels like we're kind of at that point with Kyle Pitts. Now, the thing is, this is a contract year for Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts has to show up this year, and I think Kyle Pitts knows that because Kyle Pitts is trying to get paid, as he should. But I really think when you do look at where the Falcons are at right now And another thing that has happened in the first few days of training camp, maybe one of the most notable things that really could affect the Falcons that we'll talk about in a second, there could definitely be increased opportunities with a young, competent quarterback like Michael Penix. And we all know that for a young quarterback, his two best friends is supposed to be a running game and his tight end. That's supposed to be his security valve. So to see that Michael Penix, even after late in the season last year, Kyle Pitts, he made some questionable decisions, such as versus the New York Giants, where he basically tossed what should have been a touchdown into an interception for the Giants. It is good to see that there is some trust building, and I do think that obviously you remain hopeful that Kyle Pitts, he can put it together this year, because in this Falcons offense, I also think this is very noteworthy. We saw reports that Kyle Pitts, he wasn't necessarily lining up as a tight end. He was actually lining up in the slot, and he's been more so working with the wide receivers this offseason than the tight ends. And Charlie Warner has really been the inline tight end. Now, that could mean a variety of things. It could really just be injury related, because we did hear that Kyle Pitts was suffering through an injury throughout the offseason and minicamp, and that he has actually been in the building rehabbing. So that could play a part in it. It can also be the fact that in a Zach Robinson offense, and really in the Sean McVay offense as it is, tight ends really only have so much of a presence in line and what you prioritize a tight end to do. So if the Falcons really are looking to get something out of Kyle Pitts this year in the passing game, it could make sense why they are lining Kyle Pitts up in the slot. And also, let's not forget, advertised when he was coming out of Florida, he's supposed to be this unicorn that you could put at any point in the field and he's able to make an impact. Now, we've seen Kyle Pitts line up in the slot. We've seen him line up in the X, and it really hasn't gone well. Now, maybe you could just chop that down to the previous head coach and his system that he had that really wasn't even pass happy as it wasn't really even pass competent in many ways. I do think you trust a Zach Robinson better with the passing game and his offense and knowing what he is doing, especially in a second year. But I think it all boils down to, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to how bad Kyle Pitts really wants it. I do believe that Michael Penix, he wants to get Kyle Pitts involved in this offense. You're talking about a big body guy who, who can be a quarterback's best friend just based off his build and being a tight end. But if we're lining him up on other spots in the field, that I think is really interesting, especially with the fact that Kyle Pitts is not the same player that he was coming out of Florida, mainly due to some of the injuries that he has sustained here. He tore his MCL his second year. He has suffered, with the toe injury. It really feels like the past few seasons, and it's just kind of coming, once again, this offseason was just another instance of him dinging his toe up. So I don't think Kyle Pitts is necessarily a 4-4 guy, and I could see it on the field. I think at this point, you honestly hope he's probably more of a 4-6 guy. And, that's still, at the end of the day, you can still do something with that, but at the same time, it's going to be how bad Kyle Pitts wants it. But I think, we do need to keep in mind that this is his contract year. And Kyle Pitts is trying to play for a new contract. And even if Kyle Pitts does come out and have this big season, I wouldn't get hooked back onto the Kyle Pitts train. I feel like for 2025 and where we are this year, I feel like we definitely need to make it worth it. As I talked about in another video, we need to make all of it worth it with a guy like Kyle Pitts and a guy like Tyler Algier as well, because they're both in contract years. There's a very real possibility they both are not back on this team next year, especially with some of the other guys that we are going to have to pay coming up. However, even with everything that we're hearing, it's going to come down to Kyle Pitts. And cannot stress that enough. And we are going to really see how bad Kyle Pitts wants it. And if he does deserve to get paid, whether that is here or elsewhere. And I don't see him getting paid here unless he were to probably take a lesser amount to stay here. And I think the whole point of going out and balling out this year for Kyle Pitts is you want to get paid as much as possible. I could probably go ahead and tell you the Falcons are not going to offer him the most money that he could get on the free agent market. But obviously talking about 2025, yes, of course, I think you could hope that Kyle Pitts, he comes out and he's finally able to put it together this year. But let's also be real for a second. With all the weapons that there is in this offense, Drake London, Bijan, Ray McCloud, Darnell Mooney, who we'll talk about in a second, I really do think there's still only so much Kyle Pitts can do. And that's why I say I think 800 yards and 7 touchdowns, that's probably a pretty solid season for Kyle Pitts, especially at the tight end position when you are looking at the other weapons in this offense. Speaking of some other things that have happened in training camp, one of the most notable things that we did here is wide receiver Darnell Mooney on, I believe, the first or second day of practice. I want to maybe say it was Thursday. He went down with a shoulder injury, and we kind of didn't hear anything for a little bit, but the Falcons did sign wide receiver DJ Chark, who started his career in Jacksonville and most recently was with the Carolina Panthers a couple years ago. And let me go ahead and say, I like the DJ Chark signing as a solid depth signing. I do think that he may be the same player that he was with Jacksonville early in his career. No, obviously age catches up to all of us, but if we need a guy to where Darnell Mooney is out for an extensive period of time that we need to go out and play, then, of course, DJ Chark, when you look at the wide receivers out there, was maybe one of the most solid options remaining. So it is definitely a solid depth signing, and you also need some bodies for preseason. I think that could just be another thing. You really do need some bodies for preseason. Now, it feels like that wide receiver room is always going to be full, but he's definitely going to have a chance to make this roster, especially if Darnell Mooney is out for an extensive period of time. Now, we did hear that Darnell Mooney suffered a shoulder injury, and he's expected to miss most of training camp. We didn't hear anything about beyond that, potentially the start of the regular season. I think obviously we can hope that Darnell Mooney is out there to start the regular season week 1. But right now, all we're hearing is most of training camp. We don't know if maybe it's something more serious. Now, I've heard things personally that it could be, but I'm not going to report on it at this time because I don't think we've really heard on it or not. However, obviously we hope that Darnell Mooney, because he was an important part of this offense last year, of course, is back out there in time for the start of the regular season. I think him missing training camp at the end of the day, as long as he's ready to go week 1, I don't have too many concerns about it. Another thing we can talk about, Billy Bowman Jr. I think he has been a guy on defense who has definitely stuck out from this draft class. We've heard reports that throughout the early parts of camp, he has been playing with the 1s and 2s. And as I think some of us expected, he's going to have a real shot to be starting in that nickel spot. But it could be as early as week 1. And I think that's definitely one of the things, as we're going to see in preseason, one of the few spots that is definitely up for grabs between him and Clark Phillips, and Dee Alford still is going to probably be competing for that spot as well. But it sounds like right now Billy Bowman Jr. has a real chance to be starting in the slot come week 1. Another guy that we've really heard of sticking out in training camp is Rukaroro. And this is a guy that I've been especially interested on. I've been really kind of interested to see how his development is going, especially in this new defensive system, because let's be real, the Falcons letting go of Grady Jarrett this offseason, it really does leave a big hole in the interior of the defense. And someone is going to have to step up. Obviously, losing Grady's leadership alone is very important, but then we're talking about on the field as well. We're going to need someone to step up and take that role, and it's got to be one of these young guys, because even though a David Onyemata is still on this team, after this year, he's probably not going to be. And I really think that we do have a David Onyemata still here at this point because we do need that veteran in the room. We also signed Morgan Fox this offseason, and that's another guy that we've heard of being in the rotation of starters. But Rukaroro has been a guy that we're hearing is really getting after it. He's out there with the first team, and he's a part of these rotations. We're also hearing, as expected, the Falcons have been running both a 4-3 and a 3-4, variations of both. And that compared to the Jimmy Lake defense, it definitely feels like there is a more emphasis of attack and letting guys roam loose. Jeff Ulbrich just today said that part of what the identity of this defense is going to be is violence. And let me go ahead and say, I love hearing that. I really love hearing that we are going to be a violent defense. That is what you got to do in the NFL. You got to be violent, especially on defense, and you got to play loose. And it feels like last year, in a lot of circumstances, Jimmy Lake, he was dropping a lot of our front seven guys back into coverage. He wasn't letting them do what they do best. That's attack the quarterback. It feels like Jeff Ulbrich is really going to let these guys attack the quarterback. And some guys that we've obviously heard, we're talking about some of the youngsters, Rukaroro and Brandon Dorlus both have been in starting rotations. And one of the big takeaways from it is it feels like the Falcons are really going to go for the rotation in a sense, rotational pass rush, rotational defensive line, which I've always been a proponent for, if no matter what, you're letting guys attack, because that keeps guys fresh, that keeps them going at it. So I've never really been against rotating, obviously, your defensive line and pass rushers in and out. I think that is always good to let guys just get an opportunity to attack, because I don't care who it is, I want to get after the quarterback. And some other noteworthy things before we close out the video is, of course, we saw Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris speak to the fans. Man, the Hill, I'll tell you something. The Hill, it really does look full. And it feels like, because obviously fans were not allowed at training camp last year due to construction, there is a hype around this team. And that Hill, it looks full. And people are excited to see this team. So there's obviously, once again, a lot of people that are banking on the Falcons heading into this season. And as we talk about, it's going to be about expectations and fulfilling those expectations. So, and we also heard Arthur Blank talk, as we do every training camp. And one of the things that he mentioned is wanting to obviously not just sustain a one-year wonder, but sustain long-term success. And that he feels like we have the right people in place to do it. I think we're going to find out this year if we do, because I think, as we have talked about, it's playoffs or bust around here. That is the mode that we are in. It is a playoffs or bust feel. We also saw Matt Ryan at training camp today. Always love to see that. He had the little ice cubes out there. So really glad to see them in Flowery Branch State. But anyways, with all that being said, appreciate everyone for watching. Make sure you, once again, subscribe, hit the post notification bell. Definitely going to be putting more content out. I will see you all in the next one, and take care.